a case that would forever alter the way law enforcement, the media, and the general public understood the limits of marital rage and betrayal. From the heart of the courtroom proceedings, one line still echoes through the decades. "I never meant to kill him. I just wanted him to feel the pain I felt." These were words attributed to Frances Hall during her trial, a stark confession that cut through the clinical forensics and brought raw human emotion into the spotlight. They encapsulate the horrifying tragedy that befell a family and left an entire community grappling with uncomfortable questions about love, loyalty, and the darkness lurking beneath domestic life. It was the tail end of the 20th century, and Texas was on the cusp of transformation. Economic shifts, technological changes in policing, and growing media attention on sensational cases were all in play. In 1990, few crimes tested the boundaries of understanding more than the murder of Bill Hall Jr. by none other than his wife, Frances Hall. Although domestic violence and crimes of passion were not unheard of, this particular incident shocked the public due to its brazen nature on a public highway, the high social standing of those involved, and the almost cinematic manner in which events unfolded. Unlike more shadowy murders that took place behind closed doors, this one occurred in full view of shocked motorists who happened to be traveling that warm October evening. That eyewitness factor, combined with the media's growing appetite for sensational trials, helped propel the story into national headlines. This case stands out not merely because it was a homicide involving a married couple, but because it challenged assumptions about who could be a perpetrator. Frances Hall, a seemingly devoted wife, was not the archetype of a cold-blooded killer. Even today, decades later, the crime remains a focal point in law enforcement seminars as a case study in how passion, jealousy, and desperation can transform a person. Many modern investigators point to this tragedy as a turning point in how police approach domestic crimes. It continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts for its complexity, the intensity of emotions involved, and the enduring mystery of what truly occurred in those final, fateful moments on the highway. The story begins long before the night of the killing. Frances Hall and Bill Hall Jr. had been married on June 2, 1978, in a small church just outside San Antonio. Over the years, they built a life that many would envy. Bill started a successful trucking company on March 15, 1985, hauling freight across the Southwest and generating a strong local reputation for honesty and fairness. Their home, situated near the outskirts of Bexar County, radiated a sense of stability. Friends and neighbors remembered them as pillars of the community. Frances was known for her warm hospitality and involvement in local charities, while Bill made a name for himself as a reliable employer who took care of his workers. By the time they reached their 12th year of marriage, few suspected the emotional fault lines running beneath the surface. Yet as time went on, tension began to simmer in the Hall household. Some close friends later recalled uneasy moments in the late 1980s, subtle shifts in Bill's behavior, and a growing distance between the couple. When whispers of an extramarital affair first emerged, no one could have imagined how drastically events would unravel. According to several acquaintances, Bill had become involved with another woman, someone younger, more vibrant, perhaps representing a new chapter in his life. Witnesses would later testify that Frances seemed suspicious and withdrawn during the summer of 1990, often staring off into the distance with an expression that combined disbelief and deep hurt. The stage was set for the explosive events of October 10, 1990. On that fateful Wednesday evening, Bill Hall Jr. set out on his Harley-Davidson motorcycle, planning to meet a friend for dinner in San Antonio. Meanwhile, Frances took to the road in her sleek black Mercedes sedan, having discovered something that confirmed her worst fears. According to what would later be pieced together in court, Frances had learned that Bill intended to spend that night with his mistress. The exact details remain somewhat murky, but it appears she intercepted a note or overheard a phone call. Armed with this painful knowledge, Frances's emotional state spiraled out of control. As dusk turned the sky into a purple-orange tapestry, Bill was last seen alive by a local rancher, Maria Gonzalez, who lived off a rural stretch of road just west of Interstate Loop 1604. Maria would later describe seeing Bill's motorcycle roar by, its taillight a red ember in the gloom. Moments afterward, she recalled a Mercedes sedan speeding in the same direction, its engine growling aggressively. Another witness, John Martin, a truck driver returning home after a long shift, would testify that he saw a woman in the driver's seat, her face a mask of grim determination. What transpired next happened quickly, but would be dissected meticulously during the investigation. Sometime around 8:20 p.m., several motorists traveling along Loop 1604 phoned local police to report a collision. One caller, Derek Pearson, described the chaos. "I saw this car, black Mercedes, just swerving in and out of lanes, almost tapping the motorcycle's rear fender. I slowed down because I was afraid of getting caught up in it. Next thing I know, the motorcycle rider loses control, tumbles, and the car just runs him over." The crime scene was a gruesome tableau illuminated by the headlights of stunned motorists. Bill lay motionless on the pavement, the twisted remains of his motorcycle scattered across the shoulder. Paramedics arrived swiftly, but it was too late. Bill Hall Jr. was pronounced dead at 8:37 p.m. The responding officers, initially unsure whether this was a bizarre accident or something more sinister, began roping off the area with yellow tape. The Mercedes had fled the scene. News of the collision spread quickly through the local radio broadcasts, interrupting evening programming. Within an hour, journalists were scrambling to learn the victim's identity and find out if this was a routine hit-and-run or a horrifying deliberate act. The next morning, October 11, 1990, Frances Hall was taken into custody at her home in Bexar County. According to Detective Robert Alvarez, who led the initial investigation, Frances appeared disheveled and emotionally distraught. She did not deny her involvement, but seemed unable to explain clearly what had driven her to such lengths. Another key figure in the case, Detective Linda Thompson, described walking into the couple's modest, tastefully decorated living room to find photographs of Bill and Frances smiling on family vacations, their early marriage radiating happiness. It was a stark contrast to the scene on the highway. Forensic evidence would play a crucial role in confirming that Frances's Mercedes had made contact with Bill's motorcycle. Investigators discovered fragments of paint and motorcycle parts embedded in the Mercedes's front bumper. The tire tracks and skid marks found at the crime scene were consistent with a vehicle accelerating before impact. As Thompson explained in a press briefing, it was clear this wasn't an unavoidable accident. The physical evidence indicated intent. But what sort of killer was Frances Hall? The crime did not fit the profile of a calculated murder for financial gain. There was no sign of premeditated planning beyond that fateful night. Instead, the murder bore the hallmarks of a crime of passion, an impulsive, violent eruption following the discovery of betrayal. Unlike killers who strive to evade detection or rely on cunning methods to disguise their crimes, Frances's signature was her very presence at the scene. She used a luxury sedan, a status symbol of success and comfort, as a deadly weapon. In a twisted way, the Mercedes itself became part of her modus operandi. It was a blunt instrument of rage, chosen not for subtlety, but for its capacity to impose her wrath on a husband who had shattered her trust. There were no ritual elements, no cryptic letters to the press or the police, and no grandiose claims of moral righteousness. Frances left no taunting messages or coded symbols. Her communication was entirely nonverbal and brutally direct, accelerating into the man she both loved and resented. Psychologists later posited that she was caught in the grip of a profound emotional meltdown. Her thought processes stripped down to the simplest, most primal level: inflict pain in response to pain. This set the case apart from other homicides of the era, leaving even seasoned investigators unsettled. The investigation into Bill Hall Jr.'s death was both straightforward and deeply complicated. Straightforward because the primary suspect presented herself plainly, Frances Hall, the victim's wife, who had a clear motive of jealousy and emotional turmoil. Complicated because unraveling the exact sequence of events and Frances's state of mind at the time of the crime required painstaking work. The initial police response was swift due to the public nature of the crime and the numerous calls that came flooding into the local sheriff's department. Within hours of the hit and run, law enforcement had taped off a large portion of Loop 1604 and set up portable floodlights, determined to collect every scrap of evidence before it disappeared. Detectives Alvarez and Thompson took charge. Alvarez, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years in homicide, relied on methodical approaches, mapping the skid marks, photographing the scene from every angle, and interviewing all available witnesses multiple times. Thompson, relatively younger but known for her tenacity, focused on Frances's background, interviewing friends, family, and neighbors to build a psychological profile. Together they worked tirelessly through October and November 1990, piecing together a timeline and weeding out extraneous information. Witness testimonies were key. John Martin, the truck driver, provided crucial insight into the immediate lead-up to the collision. Carl Whitaker, a longtime friend of Bill's who had met him on the side of the highway earlier that evening to discuss a new shipping contract, recalled that Bill seemed distracted, checking his watch repeatedly. Whitaker testified that Bill mentioned an argument at home, hinting he might need time away to clear his head. Maria Gonzalez's testimony placed Frances on the scene, just moments before the fatal collision, and Derek Pearson's 911 call corroborated her presence, as well as her aggressive driving. The combination of these accounts painted a vivid picture of the final minutes of Bill's life. Physical evidence further solidified the case. Paint chips on the Mercedes's bumper matched Bill's motorcycle, while tiny flecks of shattered taillight glass were found embedded in the sedan's grille. Roadway analysis confirmed that the Mercedes accelerated rather than braked as it approached Bill. Investigators also discovered a torn piece of cloth that matched Bill's riding jacket lodged in a crevice of the front hood. The prosecution later presented this as damning evidence, arguing that Frances deliberately rammed and then ran over Bill. However, the investigation faced setbacks. Initially, some questioned whether Bill's death might have resulted from a mechanical failure. Lawyers for the defense floated the theory that the Mercedes's accelerator had malfunctioned or that Frances in a panic had lost control of the car. There was also the early rumor that a second vehicle might have been involved, a mysterious third party who forced Frances's hand. These theories were thoroughly examined and discarded as the evidence mounted against Frances. The mechanical inspection of the Mercedes revealed no faults. There were no strange tire marks belonging to another vehicle, and no credible witness mentioned a mystery driver. Another complicating factor was the intense media coverage. Within days, local news stations broadcast breathless updates, often with dramatic background music and headlines like, "Deadly Road Rage in Bexar County." Newspapers ran photos of Frances's stoic face as she entered police custody. The public quickly took sides, some sympathizing with Frances as a woman scorned, others condemning her as a remorseless murderer. Radio talk shows debated the meaning of this crime in the context of changing gender roles and the sanctity of marriage. Some callers accused the media of sensationalism, while others believed the coverage might help bring all the facts to light. To maintain credibility, investigators had to navigate these public currents carefully. Alvarez and Thompson refused to comment on lurid details and kept press briefings limited to confirmed facts. They also had to rely on emerging technologies of the time, such as improved forensic testing for paint and fiber analysis. While this was not a cold case, the complexity demanded meticulous, modern methods. By early December 1990, prosecutors felt confident they had a strong case. As the investigation progressed, several suspects and theories emerged, although they were quickly narrowed down. Initially, due to the dramatic nature of the event, police considered whether Bill's mistress might have been involved. Her identity, never officially confirmed by law enforcement but widely speculated upon in local gossip circles, became a tantalizing focus for the public. Could she have orchestrated a deadly confrontation? Investigators interviewed her on multiple occasions, but found no evidence connecting her to the murder. She claimed to have been at a friend's home the entire evening and had no reason to confront Bill on that particular night. The woman, who requested anonymity, admitted to an affair but vehemently denied any involvement in planning harm. Another theory put forth by Bill's business partner was that a disgruntled trucking competitor might have targeted Bill. After all, Bill's trucking enterprise had grown significantly since March 15, 1985, making him a local success story. But a review of financial records, interviews with employees, and background checks on rival companies revealed no motive strong enough to result in murder. In truth, no one outside the immediate family circle had such a personal stake in Bill's death. Moreover, the physical evidence was too clear. It all pointed back to Frances and the Mercedes that night. There were attempts by the defense to suggest that Bill had been abusive or had threatened Frances, painting her as a battered wife lashing out in self-defense. However, no credible evidence supported ongoing physical abuse. Neighbors who witnessed occasional arguments described them as heated, but not violent. Frances's sister and close friends acknowledged tension, but were shocked at the idea of ongoing abuse. While anything is possible behind closed doors, the lack of bruises, police reports, or medical records undermined this narrative. Ultimately, the gravity of evidence left Frances Hall as the sole primary suspect. Investigators systematically eliminated others. Bill's mistress was cleared after providing a solid alibi corroborated by 3 witnesses. Potential business rivals had neither the means nor the motive to stage such a brazen public murder. In the end, no one could challenge the simple conclusion that Frances herself was the perpetrator. By January 25, 1991, the case advanced to trial. In a packed courtroom, the prosecution laid out its evidence with methodical precision. Photograph after photograph showed the twisted motorcycle, the skid marks, and the torn jacket fragment. Witness after witness described seeing Frances behind the wheel. John Martens' calm, detailed testimony about watching her tailgate Bill's motorcycle was especially damning. Forensic experts explained paint transfer and collision angles, leaving little room for alternative explanations. The defense struggled to humanize Frances, painting her as a heartbroken wife who lost her senses. They argued that it was a tragic accident, a moment of madness rather than cold-blooded murder. Frances herself took the stand on February 10, 1991. Tearful and trembling, she insisted she never intended to kill Bill. She had followed him to confront him, maybe scare him, but not end his life. Her voice cracked under cross-examination as she tried to explain her actions. Yet the facts were immovable. The jury seemed unconvinced that this could be anything but deliberate vehicular homicide. On March 1, 1991, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Frances Hall was convicted of murder and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The public reaction was mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others pitied Frances, believing she had acted under extraordinary emotional duress. Still, the dominant narrative was one of shock and disillusionment. That a middle-class wife and mother, known for kindness, could unleash lethal rage on the man she once adored. In the years following the trial, the Frances Hall murder case lingered in the collective memory. As time passed, certain aspects began to fade, overshadowed by more recent crimes and scandals. Yet it never disappeared entirely. Early true crime television specials, recorded on grainy VHS tapes and aired in the late 1990s, covered the case to underline the warning signs of domestic instability. In these specials, investigators Alvarez and Thompson gave cautious interviews, emphasizing how essential it was to take seriously the emotional red flags that often precede domestic violence. Modern developments, spurred by technological advancements, have allowed for a fresh look at the evidence. In 2020, a team of criminal justice students at a nearby university requested case files under the Freedom of Information Act to study the Hall murder for a class project on historical homicides. Digital enhancements of old crime scene photographs and advanced accident reconstruction software confirmed the investigators' original conclusions. More recent psychological evaluations of similar cases have lent further credence to the theory that Frances's act was a sudden, unplanned eruption of violence triggered by discovering her husband's affair. While no new suspects have surfaced, some investigators and private researchers have wondered if any subtle medical or psychological conditions might have contributed to Frances's extreme behavior. Was she suffering from undiagnosed depression or borderline personality disorder, exacerbated by the stress of betrayal? With the tools now available, improved DNA analysis, better accident reconstruction software, and enhanced psychological profiling, modern criminologists have found nothing to suggest Frances was anything but a desperate woman who snapped. Interviews with prison psychiatrists point to a deep remorse that set in during her incarceration. According to one prison counselor, Frances often spoke of Bill with sorrow and confusion, as if even decades later she could not fully understand why she did what she did. The cultural impact of the Frances Hall case is undeniable. It has inspired a handful of books, most notably a true crime compilation published in the late 1990s, This anthology dedicated a chapter to the Hall murder, exploring the social dynamics of marriage, infidelity, and rage. In the early 2000s, a made-for-television movie dramatized the events, albeit with a fictionalized mistress and heightened family conflicts to captivate viewers. The accuracy was debatable, but the public's continued interest was clear. Over time, the case also influenced how local law enforcement and the justice system treat domestic disputes and infidelity tensions. Police training academies in Texas have occasionally referenced the Hall murder as a cautionary tale, reminding officers never to underestimate the potential volatility in domestic situations. In the broader sphere of true crime history, the Hall case stands as a reminder that not all murderers fit a predetermined profile. It challenged stereotypes about gender, class, and motive. By the late 20th century, the public had grown used to sensational crimes and serial killers with cryptic calling cards. This case, however, was raw and tragically simple. A wife killing her husband out of jealousy and pain. Its legacy persists, ensuring that journalists, researchers, and the curious public continue to revisit it when exploring the darker corners of domestic life. Today, people still discuss the Frances Hall murder in online forums and true crime podcasts. Amateur sleuths pore over details, theorizing about what might have happened had Bill chosen a different route that night, or had Frances sought help from friends or family instead of taking to the road. The emotional charge that the case carried in 1990 has not entirely dissipated. Instead, it has become a touchstone for examining how easily ordinary lives can derail under the weight of betrayal. As we reflect on the Frances Hall case, certain truths emerge. It underlines the unpredictability of human emotion, the terrible consequences of momentary lapses in judgment, and the fragility of trust within a marriage. The detectives who worked tirelessly to solve it, the witnesses who bravely testified, the journalist who reported on it, and the public who consumed every detail, all played roles in shaping the legacy of this crime. Even now, in a world that has changed significantly since 1990, the Hall murder resonates as a cautionary example of how love can curdle into violence.